Galactic war ends instantly as dormant human fleet awakens. The galaxy had never known peace. For centuries, war raged between the two dominant superpowers, the Virax Dominion, an empire of war-born reptilian conquerors, and the Arasan hegemony, a race of hyper-intelligent but cruel strategists. Their conflict had turned entire star systems into ruin, their battle lines shifting endlessly across the void. And yet, one sector of the galaxy had remained untouched for over 3,000 years. It was known simply as the Dead Sector, a place avoided by all, where no ships dared venture, where even the most advanced scans failed to penetrate the endless debris fields. No one truly knew what lay within. Some called it cursed. Others whispered that it was the graveyard of an ancient, long-extinct race. But as the war reached its breaking point, desperation drove the Arasans to do the unthinkable. They entered the Dead Sector. Commander Virax of the Arasan Third Fleet watched the silent wreckage drift past his battleship's viewport. His 300-strong armada glided through the void, their engines barely making a whisper against the cosmic silence. They were searching for something, anything, to turn the war in their favor. They found it. Or rather, it found them. A warning klaxon blared across the command deck. "Commander, we have an anomaly." Virax turned sharply. "Explain." The sensor officer hesitated. His furred ears twitched and his bioluminescent eyes flickered uncertainly. "Not debris. We're detecting," he swallowed, "a fleet." Silence fell over the bridge. "A fleet?" Virax repeated, his voice low. "Impossible." "No, sir. It's massive. Hundreds of warships. Thousands. But they're dormant. No power signatures, no movement. Just sitting there." Virax's mind raced. An entire fleet lying dormant in the Dead Sector? This could be the key to destroying the Virax once and for all. "Deploy boarding teams," he ordered. "I want those ships operational." But as the first Arasan shuttles breached the massive derelicts, the nightmare began. The ghost of humanity. The ships were old. Far older than anything in Arasan history. The corridors were lined with faded symbols, unreadable warnings etched in a language lost to time. The moment the Arasan troops stepped aboard, their comms filled with static, then whispers. Something was waking up. Back on his flagship, Virax barely had time to process the incoming reports before the lights on his bridge flickered. A deep, mechanical voice, so ancient, so cold, rumbled through every speaker. "Unauthorized boarding detected. Identify or be purged." Virax's blood ran cold. Then the dead fleet came alive. Engines that had lain dormant for millennia roared to life. Hulls once lifeless pulsed with power. And before Virax could give the order to retreat, a signal blasted through every Arasan ship, a transmission so powerful it shook the galaxy itself. A message. A declaration. Spoken in a language no living being had heard in over 3,000 years. "Humanity awakens." And in that moment, the war was already over. Humanity returns. The lead battleship of the ancient fleet shifted. Its cannons, the size of entire cityscapes, hummed with energy beyond comprehension. Then, for the first time in 3 millennia, a human voice spoke. "Who dares disturb our rest?" Virax trembled as his sensors confirmed the impossible. The power readings were unlike anything in Arasan or Virax history. This was no abandoned fleet. This was a sleeping giant. And it had just woken up. The silence before the storm. Commander Virax's claws dug into the armrests of his command chair as his fleet's sensors filled with unreadable data. The ancient human warships, once cold and lifeless, now pulsed with impossible power. Energy signatures spiked beyond measurable limits. Weapons systems were charging. A deep, thunderous voice echoed across the Arasan fleet once more. "Who dares disturb our rest?" Virax had seen many horrors in this war. He had led fleets into battle against the nightmarish war machines of the Virax. He had ordered the destruction of entire worlds in the name of Arasan victory. But this was something else. "Get us out of here," he whispered. The command was relayed instantly. Engines flared as Arasan ships reversed course, scrambling to retreat from the deadliest unknown they had ever encountered. But it was already too late. The human fleet, once dormant for 3,000 years, was awake, and it was watching. The first shot. A single human battleship shifted. Its hull, blackened by time, gleamed as ancient armor reactivated. Massive turrets realigned. And then, a single shot. Not a missile. Not plasma. Something worse. A pulse of energy detonated through space, striking the lead Arasan warship. Shields collapsed instantly. Hull plating, designed to withstand supernova-class weaponry, melted as if it were paper. Then silence. Virex stared in disbelief. That ship, the ISS Revenant, had not just fired a weapon. It had rewritten the rules of war. The Orasan fleet was powerless. Virex knew it then. They were never meant to find this fleet. And now the dead had returned. The broadcast. Across the Orasan command deck, every screen flickered. And then a human appeared. His face was pale, lined with age, but his eyes burned with something ancient. A slow breath escaped his lips as he gazed upon the Orasan fleet with something between curiosity and disdain. How long? The voice was smooth, calm, too calm. A nearby officer trembled. 3,000 years, he whispered. The human inhaled sharply, closing his eyes. Then when he opened them, his voice was like a hammer on steel. Who rules the stars now? Virex hesitated. His throat was dry. The words barely came out. Dish the Virax and the Orasan hegemony, he managed. A flicker of recognition crossed the human's face. Then for the first time since awakening he smiled. Ah, he said. The same old war. The warning. The human's gaze hardened. His voice carried across the fleet, across open space, across every comm channel. Tell me, Orasan commander, why do you fight? Virex hesitated. The truth? For power. For conquest. The same reasons the Virax fought. The same reasons the war had lasted for centuries. The human's expression darkened. Then your war is over. A cold chill spread through Virex's body. Why you can't possibly? The human raised a hand. We are humanity, he said. We do not kneel. We do not serve. We do not forget. A deep hum resonated through the battlefield. The human fleet, every single warship, shifted into position. Thousands of weapons powered up, their targeting systems locking onto both the Orasan and Virax homeworlds. Then one final message. Go. Tell your empires that their time has ended. The deadline. The Orasan fleet fled. They didn't fight, didn't argue. They simply ran. And as they did, a final transmission burned across every known frequency in the galaxy. A message to every ruler, every fleet, every world. From humanity to the galaxy. You have one cycle to surrender. After that, we will not ask again. The galaxy held its breath. And for the first time in history, the war stopped. The galaxy holds its breath. The message spread like wildfire. Across the known galaxy, the words of a long-forgotten race echoed through every communication network, every intelligence channel, every war council. You have one cycle to surrender. After that, we will not ask again. And for the first time in history, the war stopped. The Virax Dominion and the Orasan hegemony, bitter enemies for centuries, suddenly weren't fighting each other. Instead, they turned their attention to a far greater threat. Humanity. The rulers of both empires gathered in secret, deep in the uncharted void where no signals could leak. A single question filled the air. Could they stop what was coming? Or had the galaxy already lost? The impossible choice. Virax War Emperor Zyrax loomed over the gathered leaders, his massive reptilian form covered in the scars of 1,000 campaigns. His voice rumbled like an avalanche. This is unacceptable. His claws flexed, gouging deep grooves into the obsidian war table. We are the dominant species of this galaxy. We have conquered, evolved, endured. His slitted eyes narrowed. And now we are expected to surrender? Orasan High Strategist Virish, draped in his flowing ceremonial robes, exhaled sharply. This is not an empire we can fight blindly. He tapped a claw against a hollow display. It showed the human fleet. Thousands of dreadnoughts, battleships, and supercarriers, each one radiating energy levels beyond known technology. But the real horror? Humanity had not even fired at full power. The ISS Revenant had unleashed one attack, and it had already rendered an entire Orasan fleet powerless. The full strength of the ancient human war machine? No one had seen it yet. Virish turned to the Virax Emperor. We do not have the luxury of ego. His voice was tight. We need to decide. Surrender, or extinction. A hush fell over the war room. But then a third voice spoke. From the shadows a figure emerged. Wrapped in tattered robes, his fur streaked with silver, Grand Seer Yarrick of the Unseen Council stepped forward. And what he said changed everything. The truth of the forgotten war. Yarrick's voice was soft. Too soft for the weight of his words. This has happened before. The room froze. Every leader turned to stare at him. Virish's breath caught. What? The ancient seer exhaled. The war we fight now is nothing compared to what once was. With a wave of his hand, a hidden archive activated. The hologram above them shifted. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the real history of humanity was revealed. The First War. Long before the Virax, before the Oracens, before the great empires that now ruled the stars, there was one war that shaped the galaxy. A war between humanity and something worse. An enemy so powerful, so utterly unstoppable, that even the full might of the human empire had been driven to the brink of annihilation. The galaxy had been on the verge of falling. And then, at the peak of destruction, humanity did the unthinkable. They took their most powerful fleet, their final, ultimate weapon of war, and they sealed themselves away. Not out of cowardice, not to surrender, but because they knew that war was not over. The battle had only been delayed. Yarrick turned to the room, his eyes burning with the weight of prophecy. The humans did not sleep out of weakness. His voice trembled. They were waiting, preparing. A silence heavy as death filled the war chamber. And then Yarrick whispered, "The enemy they fought is still out there." The unstoppable return. A cold dread filled the room. Virex's mind raced. Could this be true? If humanity's awakening was not just about ending the war, but about preparing for something worse, then the entire galaxy was in danger. Virish turned to the holo display again. His claws hovered over the map, tracing out the dead sector where humanity had slept. And then he saw it. A second anomaly. Something deep in the void. Something moving. Something vast. Something coming. His throat tightened. By the gods. The War Emperor Xyrax leaned in, his slitted pupils narrowing. What? Virish's voice was barely a whisper. We're not the only ones who heard humanity's awakening. Cliffhanger ending, the new war begins. Across the galaxy, ancient sensors, long dormant, blinked to life. On the very edges of known space, a signal replied. Not in words, not in a language, but in the deep, gut-wrenching, mind-breaking pulse of an intelligence beyond understanding. And in the dark corners of the universe, something else began to wake up. Something older than humanity. Something that had nearly destroyed them once before. And this time, had been waiting too. The nightmare returns. Deep in the void, beyond the edges of charted space, something moved. The signal that had answered humanity's awakening wasn't just a reply. It was a warning. And now from the depths of the black they came. The enemy humanity had sealed itself away to escape. Their final, impossible foe was back. They did not arrive in ships. They were the ships. A fleet of living nightmares. Their hulls shifted and pulsed, organic yet metallic, absorbing the light of distant stars. Their weapons grew like bone and muscle, shifting in impossible ways. They did not conquer. They consumed. Planets, stars, civilizations. The first world they reached vanished. No explosion. No survivors. Emptiness. And in that moment, every ruler of the galaxy knew the truth. The war between the Oracens and the Virax? The battle for dominance? The petty conflicts? None of it mattered anymore. Because now the end had begun. The final stand. At the heart of the galaxy, aboard the ISS Revenant, Admiral Lucian Kane stood on the command deck, eyes locked onto the growing terror in the void. The enemy had arrived. His fleet, once buried, once forgotten, was now the only thing standing between the galaxy and extinction. A transmission blinked. Oracen High Strategist Virish and War Emperor Xyrax appeared side by side, together for the first time in history. Their voices, once filled with arrogance and war, were humbled. We were wrong. Virish's voice was tight. We thought we ruled this galaxy. Xyrax growled. But we were only the caretakers. His burning eyes locked onto Kane. This was always your war, wasn't it? Lucian Kane exhaled slowly. His fingers hovered over the final command. And then, at last, he spoke. No, he turned to the vast armada behind him. It's yours now, too. A moment of silence. Then, the order was given. And the battle to decide the fate of the galaxy began. The wrath of humanity. The human fleet moved as one. Ancient warships, their power untouched by time, unleashed hell. Turrets ignited with plasma, energy lances carved through the black, and weapons that defied modern understanding tore into the invaders. But the enemy did not die easily. They absorbed the destruction. Their hulls rippled, shifting, adapting. They struck back with weapons that twisted reality itself, rending entire dreadnoughts into nothingness. For every one they destroyed, two more took its place. The Virax and Arasans, finally united, fought alongside humanity. Yet it wasn't enough. The enemy kept coming. And soon the void was filled with nothing but fire and death. The sacrifice. The battle was turning. One by one human warships fell. Even the ISS Revenant, humanity's flagship, was crippled. Lucian Kane stood, blood seeping from a wound in his side. His vision blurred, but he could still see the horror unfolding. The galaxy was about to lose. But then, a single, desperate idea burned in his mind. The human fleet's weapons weren't enough. But there was one final weapon. One last measure buried deep within their warships. Something humanity had sworn never to use. Because it didn't just destroy enemies. It erased them. Kane turned to his crew. Are the Omega protocols still active? Silence. Then a whisper from his tactical officer. They are. No one spoke. Because they all knew what it meant. Kane gave them a final nod. Then let's remind the galaxy why they feared us. The end of the enemy. Across the battlefield, every surviving human ship activated the Omega protocols. Engines dimmed. Hulls cracked open. And then, for the first time in 3,000 years, the true power of the human race was unleashed. The stars turned black. A wave of pure annihilation surged from the human fleet, consuming everything in its path. Not just the enemy. Not just their ships. The very laws of physics warped. Time stuttered. Space cracked. The enemy had adapted to every weapon ever used against them. But this was something new. They could not evolve fast enough. One by one they vanished. Not destroyed. Not defeated. Erased. Until at last, the void was silent. And the war was over. The final moment. On the bridge of the ISS Revenant, Admiral Kane collapsed to one knee. His vision swam. His crew was alive but barely. The Arasans and the Virax, battered and broken, sent their first transmissions. For the first time in their history they spoke not as conquerors, but as survivors. And then a final message was sent. From humanity to the galaxy. A simple promise. It is done. And with that, the dormant human fleet, having fulfilled its final duty, powered down once more. The legendary ending, the legacy of humanity. The war was over. The galaxy was forever changed. The Arasans and Virax would go on to rebuild, not as enemies but as allies. Yet one question remained. Would humanity stay? Or would they disappear again? For weeks, the remaining rulers waited. Watched. And then one day, the human fleet was gone. Not destroyed. Not abandoned. Simply vanished. Leaving only a single message burned into the stars. We will return when we are needed. And so, for the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was at peace. Not because of war. Not because of conquest. But because the ones who had ruled before had ensured it. And somewhere in the dark where no eyes could see, humanity watched. Waiting. Until the galaxy needed them once more. If you don't want to miss out on more mind-blowing HFY stories, make sure you're subscribed. You never know when the next legendary tale drops.